We are getting a new idea this morning of a potential threat for millions of Canadians in this pandemic. Physical violence, racist abuse. A new report shows what Asian Canadians are facing and experiencing. CBC News has an advance copy of the report that's coming out officially in just a little while later this morning. But here's the top line finding, the big number, that Asian Canadians have reported more than 1,100 cases, racist attacks over the last year. This is from March the 10th of 2020, when the pandemic was increasingly dominating the news here up until last month. Katie Nicholson is reporting on this story today. It's Katie who obtained an advance copy of the report. And Katie, going to take us through the findings of what Asian Canadians have been experiencing. Katie.
Yeah, so Heather, this is a really in-depth snapshot. And the way that they gathered this data was a number of groups came together and they put out basically a survey on 2 websites. They made it available in multiple languages to sort of better get that uptake, to get people who don't necessarily have English as a first language to participate. And then what they did is they drilled down into a subset of these numbers and really gave us an overview of what it is Asian Canadians have been experiencing since the start of the pandemic. So a couple of the top lines here. First of all, there is representation here from every province. These incidents have happened in every province, but in particular, 44% of the cases come from BC and 40% of the cases come from Ontario. We're also learning that, the incidents here, they run the gamut from racial slurs. There's a story in here about a 15-year-old who was walking along the street and a woman who was approaching her across the street and yelled out, "Sorry, I'm allergic to Asians." Small things like that. And then there are larger things such as physical assault. So all of this sort of encompassed here into the aggressions and microaggressions that Asian Canadians have felt this year. 11% of the cases included violent physical assault or unwanted contact. 10% of cases included being coughed or spat on. So a number of small illustrative examples are sort of pulled through this report, which will be released at 10:30 today. And we're also getting a sense of who the main victims are of these types of behaviors, these types of assaults or aggressions. In most cases, 60% of the respondents were women in this, or they identified as women. And this also points to the fact that older and younger people are more at risk for these types of interactions, of these cases of anti-Asian racism in Canada.
When you look through the report, Katie, what does it say about the cause of this?
Well, I mean, anti-Asian racism is a thread that has gone through this nation's history. I think of Japanese internment camps, for example, during the Second World War. There are a number of examples that are brought up in this report, but the thing that really made this, a report that made this come up on everybody's radar was, of course, the pandemic and the language around it. Very early on, the pandemic was racialized. And there is this almost sense of culpability, the idea that there is a blaming on Asian people for this pandemic. Here is Justin Kong. I know you're going to speak to him just a little bit, but I did speak with him yesterday about this, on this very notion of the idea that Asian people have somehow are to blame for this pandemic.
A lot of it is related to this notion of culpability, right? Like that somehow, Asians and, Chinese Canadians and Chinese people or Asian people are responsible for the horrors of this pandemic, right? Which isn't the case, right? I think that's one of the things that we hear a lot, it's like, it's your fault that, we have this pandemic, or it's your fault.
Now, Heather, that is one of the reasons that they're really pushing to combat misinformation and social media that sort of perpetuates these ideas of the China virus or the Kung flu, all of these sort of pejorative terms that we have heard used over the last year.
It lays out the picture, Katie, this report does, in terms of what has been happening, and it also looks to the future. What kind of solutions does it propose?
They are calling on all levels of government to take action. This is a community issue. This is an education issue. This is an issue where people need support, and particularly they're looking to the most vulnerable subsets of the Asian community in Canada. I did speak with Amy Go. She's with the Chinese Canadian Council for Social Justice, and she sort of spoke to the need for frontline workers, especially people in precarious employment, to be protected. 1/5 of these incidents occurred in sort of public food spaces, such as restaurants and grocery stores. And she says that really indicates there is a need here to really step up and protect this subset. Here's Amy Go.
These are frontline low-income workers who have to go to work so that we can stay home. And at the same time, they are being targeted. So they put themselves at risk of not only getting the virus, but at risk of being attacked in their own workplaces, so that, to protect us while we are not protecting them.
So they are looking for concrete action, not just tweets today from politicians.
Katie, thank you very much. Beginning our coverage there with Katie Nicholson. And as Katie indicated, our next guest, one of the people who helped write that report, and you heard in Katie's reporting, Justin Kong is with us. He is the executive director of the Chinese Canadian National Council, the Toronto chapter. Justin, welcome to our program. Thank you for being available before you release this officially in the next hour.
Good morning, Heather.
Katie's reporting, Justin, I think will be the first time that many Canadians are learning about what has been happening in the past year. What impact do you hope this report has?
Well, I think one of the immediate impacts we're hoping is that Canadians from across Canada will begin to recognize that, this virus is not the fault of Asians or Chinese Canadians, right? I think that's one of the really important things that we see behind the racist attacks, is it's based on this sense that, Asian people are responsible for the virus. We hope that really that Canadians from across Canada can start to recognize that, hey, actually, no one wanted this virus to happen, and it's certainly not the fault of Asian Canadians or Asian people, right? And we shouldn't put the blame on these communities, and we definitely shouldn't be attacking these communities.
So Katie was mentioning, obviously there has been historically anti-Asian racism in this country, but the cause of this recent spike you trace right back to the pandemic. And the language, as Katie mentioned, things like Wuhan virus or China virus or Kung flu. Can you tell me, Justin, what it's like to hear that when people use that kind of derogatory description for things, what it's like to receive that as an Asian Canadian man?
Yeah, I think, for the community as a whole, it's very, very sad to see, right? Because very early on in the pandemic, Chinese and Asian Canadians were, warning Canadians about the pandemic, right? And, taking precautions and sharing tips around how to protect our communities and protect our neighbors, right? Asian and Chinese Canadians are often on the front line working as essential workers, as Amy mentioned earlier, taking care of us, protecting us, feeding us, caring for our seniors, right? So the double kind of like, not only are we, facing the racism, but also now we have to feel like we're being targeted because of the pandemic. I think it's really hurting the community, right? It's a sense of like inequity and a sense of injustice, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Personally, have you yourself been on the receiving end of racist language or any racist attacks in the past year?
No, but we have heard many instances from people who have been working on the front lines, right? For example, we heard about a young frontline worker who works in the medical sector, and as a nurse, like even though they were out there in the pandemic, really early on in the pandemic, supporting everyone in the community and making sure people are taken care of, still she was attacked after work, right? She was spat on, people told her to, go back to China. All she did was be in public with a mask, right? And so that's just one example, right? We've certainly also heard a lot of examples about, small businesses and restaurants and, Asian businesses who are also targeted, right? Not only by, racist attacks, but often also through like stigmatization and exclusion. Oh, I'm not going to go to that Chinese restaurant because they're responsible for the virus, right? Logics like that are still in perpetuating today, right? And so I think we really have a responsibility. Our government has a responsibility, and certainly our media has a responsibility to address these issues and really make clear, hey, it's not the fault of Asian people that we have the COVID-19 virus, right? No one wants this virus to occur, and certainly it's not a specific community that caused the virus to spread, right?
The personal accounts, I expected you would hear some, yes, from people in your community, even if you've been, I would say, fortunate not to have experienced any yourself. We certainly have reported on them. We were just remembering our morning team, the attacks in Vancouver at a 7-Eleven. That was a horrible moment for an elderly Asian person out in Vancouver, and an attack in a bus stop. They have been in the headlines for our program over the past year. Even if you yourself, Justin, haven't dealt with these personally, I'm wondering, how has the past year changed you?
Yeah. I think it's a sense of constant fear, right? I think, especially when I'm going to spaces where I know I may be the only minority, you're just not sure, right? You're just not sure. Is someone gonna, do something aggressive, or, are they gonna, give you a hard time, right? And so it's not even, even in our own communities and in our own neighborhoods and, in places where, obviously, racism has long existed. And, I've faced racist attack and incidences growing up as an Asian Canadian in Toronto. But, it's just that sense of constant fear and not knowing if someone might do something to you, right? And so, yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. People have told us at CBC News, for example, that they share that fear, and they've also had to, as a result, change how they behave, much more low-key, maybe staying out, not going out to the same degree. I don't know, have you had to make those changes in how you live?
Yeah, definitely, right. I think, many people in the community are really feeling this heightened sense of insecurity, right? And so it totally impacts many things, like how we decide to live our lives, where we decide to go, where we decide to shop, right? It's pervasive, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's also impacting how we're able to take care of ourselves, right? Whether that's as workers or as small businesses, but how we're able to live lives that are meaningful, right? So it's totally impacting on all those vectors, and which is why it's so problematic.
I'm wondering how these shootings in Atlanta within the last week have changed things. I mean, obviously, we're seeing protests against anti-Asian racism, even in Canada. People are talking about this in Canada. Your report comes along just, of course, in the immediate aftermath of what happened in Atlanta. How do you think that might change the discussion here in this country?
Well, certainly hoping that, at least, we begin to recognize the issue and take action on the issue, right? It's really great to see that, the massive, organizing efforts, around North America that's saying, no, we won't stand for this, right? In many ways, the pandemic has really illustrated the racial injustices in our system, right? And certainly anti-Asian racism is a big component of that racism as well. So it's great to see that people are stepping up, and it's great to see that more people are organizing around the issue. And certainly we need to demand action from all levels of government and from all sectors of society, right, to address anti-Asian racism and all racisms that exist.
I know that's a big part of the recommendations in your report, the calls for all levels of government to do more. We're going to talk more about that later on in this hour, Justin, but I want to thank you for your time today and sharing some of the personal effects of all of this on you and people within the community to whom you've been speaking. Thank you, Justin Kong.
Thank you, Heather.
Appreciate it. The Executive Director of the Chinese Canadian National Council, the Toronto chapter.